Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. Hi, Beth. Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
This episode is it's covering a topic that I feel like should be talked about a lot, but really doesn't get a ton of play. Or when people talk about it, they tend to tell the nice, shiny, bright parts.
Right. Yes.
And not necessarily. Right. I mean, it makes sense. And that's because we're going to talk about what happens, what really goes down when you're a business owner and you're still a whole human who has partnerships, and maybe you own a business with a partner, or even if you just own a business and your partner is there present with you while you're doing that. I think the phrase, like, are you in business with your partner? I'm like, how could they not be?
Yeah, that's not a real separation.
Exactly. Like Ken has been in and out of my businesses over the years. And I'm like, yeah, but he's always there. He's always part of it. And other partners have at times too been like, they can't help but be impacted.
Yes. Yes, I would agree with that so much.
So tell me a little bit. So I know about your store, but let's just start us off. Tell us a little bit about like what you do, what your business is.
Sure. Yes. So I own Earth and Salt, which is a pleasure-centered adult store in Burlington, Vermont. It is a brick and mortar store that's been open since August 2021, which is about a year and a half now, online for 6 months prior to that. So I'm business owner, sex educator, filling in all the blanks, doing all the things that business owners do. And, wasn't my background prior to this. I was in the corporate world, museum world, worked a lot of different jobs. So I had a lot of learning to do as I came into this. So there was also some steep learning curves associated with this.
Yeah. Okay. The steep learning curve. I have been in business basically my whole adult life. I did a little working for other people in my early 20s and immediately found myself to be essentially unemployable because I am a pain in the butt. But opening a business, whether you're like new to the business world or not, every time I start something new, I realize that it impacts all of me. Mm-hmm. And one of the areas that I find people are most surprised about is that it really impacts your relationship. It impacts your desire. My experience has been it changes the way I'm living my life so significantly. So I'd love to hear, especially for you, because you're talking about brick and mortar, which has its own tone. What happened for you 18 months ago when you opened? Or maybe there were two changes when you opened online and then again when you opened for business.
So many changes. Just innumerable. And it's only been really a couple of years. I mean, the first change was just, having the realization I wanted to open this business and telling my partner, like, I want to open a business. I'm not a business owner. This is not my background. I wanted to do it in a state we didn't even live in. Right. So this is absolutely bizarre conversation of like, oh, I've had this concept that I actually feel like is exactly what I'm going to do. And it's not really a question, but hey, I'm pretending it's a question. And then just having to work through that process of like, okay, are we going to move there? Does that feel like something we actually want to do? Coming up and visiting, finding a house, all of that during the pandemic too, which was, its own experience. And then, getting the online store open was just a lot more work and some effort, but not a huge like lifestyle change. But yeah, opening the brick and mortar, my hours are different. My weekends are now completely taken up. I needed his help a lot as I was getting ready for it, because thankfully he's a carpenter and a former cabinet maker, which was like everything I needed at that time, because we made our own, tables. We made our own shelves. Like he was very involved in like the physical opening of the store, which was so important. And I was so grateful to have him. But that's relying on a person in a new way. That's adding stress to the relationship. That's my hours changing. My level of energy drastically changed at that point. And I was pretty much heads down from there for probably like a year, almost a year and a half after that, just getting to where I am now, even of like, oh, I can even look back and see it now instead of just like soldering on, you know?
Right. Yeah. Like you have just enough distance now to start to see the
Yes.
impact that it has.
Yes.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
It's not possible in my experience. I don't think it's possible to add something as significant as a business
Mhm.
and not have it really become like this third party that is interacting with your relationship. And I
Yes.
think that's how this conversation really got started.
Yeah.
Is when I think about my significant relationships, I think yeah, my business is definitely one. Like
Mm.
it has its
Yes.
own like say in my life. And I
Mhm.
know that it's mine. And yet,
Yes.
yeah, like how does this work for you? Like I know that
Yeah.
I make decisions like
Yeah.
that affect my anchor partnership that are
Mhm.
based on what the business needs, like as if it has its
Yeah.
own autonomy and agency
Right.
almost.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a wonderful phrasing. And I wish too, that's like something I wish had been a part of the conversation as I got into business ownership. I did a business plan class and they tell you how much work it's going to be. They don't really talk about like the impact on your multiple relationships outside of it, right? Because it's going to deeply impact you in so many ways and ways you can't even anticipate, which for the most part is good. It's just a lot of very fast processing because if you don't process it, your business is impacted, and then there's lots of ramifications from that as well. So I really agree with that concept for sure.
Do you find that you've had to really get clear about how you prioritize? Because I find like
Mm.
it's so easy for
Mm.
me to fall into one or the other. Like either well, actually, over the last 2 weeks, I was doing this big thing. I was putting out my jealousy masterclass, which is like
Mm. Yeah.
it's like 15 years of work
Yeah.
finally coming to fruition, right? Like in a new.
Yeah.
And I found myself making decisions that like they impacted not just my relationship, but
Mm.
also my partner. Like they
Yeah.
impacted my anchor partner who's here with me. They impacted his sleep. They impacted it
Yes.
like as if we just had a newborn.
Right.
Like I
Yes.
remember,
That's how it feels.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Not that I've had children, but I agree.
what is so, I mean, I've had a bunch and
Yes.
it is shocking me how much I was willing to prioritize
Mm.
moment to moment. And now I look back over my shoulder and I'm like, that was just like he got deprioritized several times. And
Yeah.
if I was possibly in a different frame of mind,
Hmm.
a little bit more calm, a little bit more well regulated, I don't know. Like
Right.
I feel like I'm better at prioritizing between partners than I am between my business and my partner.
That makes complete sense to me, I would have to say, because I mean, you can't logic with a business, right? Like you can't negotiate or really make concessions in a comfortable way. Like it is its own creature, it has its own needs, and it's just constant, right? Like you really can't just be like, oh, I'm gonna go like do a different thing for a week without having like so many things built in and put into place that would allow you to do that. I mean, again, I hate to make the kid analogy because that is such a different encompassing sort of experience, but there are some similarities, right? Like you have this thing you have signed up to take care of, and it has its own needs, and you don't really always get to choose your level of involvement or your hours or what it dictates from you at any given time. And yeah, the prioritization is so hard. I think I'm just getting to the point where I can start managing prioritization. I don't feel like I was doing it at all in the last 2 years. Just because to get something off the ground to the point that it's going to be steady enough where you can step away from it, it takes incredible amount of like force and dedication. And I think it was necessary, but it's really uncomfortable to go through. And like knowing that ahead of time is very difficult. Managing it in the moment is difficult. I'm lucky that my partner has owned his own businesses in the past, so that's made him more understanding, but not always happy about the situation, right? Like, and I can say too, he's much older than myself. He's in his 70s. I'm in my mid to late 30s. And so our lifestyles are very different. And so like he's got a lot of time. He's ready to go out and like, let's go fishing for a day. And I'm like, no, I gotta buy inventory, I gotta do cash flow. I can't, catch a fish. And so that's been uncomfortable because I want him to have a wonderful, deep, meaningful life, and to not always be there for that and be able to support that has been a bit painful. But it's also, I chose to have this business and it has needs.
I think, okay, two things are coming up for me there. First off, I love talking business and talking to people about the fact that, of course, we want to build our businesses with systems that allow us to own the business rather than be the business. And while that's true, I've owned a lot of businesses, and all of them, there's an on-ramp phase. Like there is a part where you're taking literally just an idea and making it into the business. And in my experience, it takes 5 or 6 years to fully get them autonomous from me. And I'm just starting year 4 of this particular business. And yeah, I mean, the whole thing is centered around me still. And so there's this ideal of like, I'm going to be a business owner and then I'll have freedom. And yet, while you're growing the thing, especially those of us who are growing businesses that are centered around an ideal or an idea, right? I know that, I mean, you started Earth and Salt for a reason. Like it's not random. It grows right up out of you. I find that that's where I notice I have to take responsibility for the fact that I chose this. This is where I decided to spend my time. And this is why, like, I have to negotiate with my partners, but also just be really clear and honest about what my bandwidth and availability is. And be willing to say, like, I'm not as available as some partners might be. I'm not. Why? It's because I have chosen to have a relationship with my business, not just to own it, but to be in a relationship with it. And it's so, it means so much to me.
Yeah. And I think too, in a same way that relationships exist, like it requires your energy, it requires your time, your focus, your creativity, your energy. Like I find I've become very aware lately of how if I am not taking the time to decompress from the business, be with myself, and then turn towards my partner, things are much messier than I want them to be. And like my access to desire and pleasure is almost non-existent. And so like I'm having to notice, oh, okay, like there is a certain amount of time I need to be able to access those things. And if I don't do that, everything is a little worse. And so like I have to for everyone's sake.
So this is a conversation that I think specifically in our area of business deserves even more attention, because it's sort of ironic that we take something that is pleasure focused, right, and relationally focused, then we make a business out of it, and all of a sudden we can find ourselves with less access to desire, less access to pleasure, less access to relationality, because we're focused on this thing. And in my experience, capitalist structures aren't super pleasure oriented. Making money, the act of making something that makes money, while it can be pleasure oriented, that doesn't mean all the acts are pleasureful. And so I find that sometimes I really have to remind myself that my ideals are relationality. My ideals are pleasure centered. And I'm sure this comes up for you. Like, how do we live that? How do we live in our businesses in a way that really truly embodies that value that we're trying to help other people reach?
I know. I mean, I like carry this thing with me of like, oh, everyone's gonna think I figured it all out, and that I'm like a sex goddess all the time, and all these things, right? And I think that too, in like in terms of like having other sexual partners, right? Like I haven't gone through the process yet of like meeting someone and telling them what my business is, but it's in my mind of like, oh, what are they gonna preemptively think about me and my capacities and talents or whatever because of the business that I'm in, right? And that's its own whole thing, certainly. But the energy is it's very difficult in that way.
Yeah, I find that it wakes up new parts of me. Like I mean, so I have this podcast and I guest on a lot of podcasts, and I'm very publicly outward facing, which makes me available to people in a way that most people are not, right? You are public facing at Earth and Salt. You are forming this service in your community. So when we're out in the dating world, it is there is a certain level of exposure I find
Mhm,
that I have
mhm. Yeah.
that's, um,
It's really strange.
it's a little
Uh,
strange. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, honestly, so for me, like I know that literally there will be people who I either am dating right now or have just dated who are listening to this exact
Right.
conversation. Yes, I'm
Right.
talking about you. If you think I'm
Right.
talking about you, talking about you.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
there's like this,
Uh,
there's this strange voyeurism
mm,
that can
mm,
happen when we are also business owners, because that's part of being in business, right? We put ourselves sort of on display. But that doesn't mean that we want to offer full access. And then
yeah.
conversely, I have a partner who I happen to live with who wants more access to me and might feel that I'm being pulled away by the business. So
Mm,
some of my partners feel like they're invited in more vulnerably to my reality.
yeah.
Whereas I think Ken, because he's here in my house, experiences the business as
Yeah.
pulling me away more.
Yes.
I think these are just realities, but they certainly inform how I look at romantic relationships. Like what does it mean to stay romantic when I'm this?
Yeah. Oh, oh, it's so hard. So hard. Romance is like such a hard thing to access when you're low on creativity and energy. And like, I imagine we're both very aware of how one plays into the other. And I think it was, was listening to like Brene Brown on a podcast, who was talking about like, you think you can push and push and push and do all these things, and you can, but it's not that it's not coming from somewhere else, right? Like it comes from somewhere else, and because of the nature of our work and because of how we're trying to help people, I think we become very quickly aware of where that's coming from a lot of times. And I think that's what a lot of people suffer with, and you probably see that in your work as well, and I certainly do every day. People are exhausted and putting all of their energy into other people, their work, but they don't have the sort of cues that we have in our own businesses that are like, oh right, this is why this is happening, this is why this is working this way or not working this way. So I try and take it as like, okay, this is sort of shitty, but I can find a way to work through it, and that actually then informs my work. And I almost feel like I learn more about relationality and relationships and connection through my business than anything else. Like, yes, I learn about sex, but boy, is it more about like, what conversations am I not having that I should be having with my
Yeah.
people?
So that's actually why I think that was the point of having
Yeah.
this conversation. Because yes, there's the like, wow, this is a big impact. And I think we are uniquely situated, those of us who work in the sexuality and relational space as business owners. I think we're uniquely situated to see the real impact of what we're not talking about, or what our partners, what people. So once upon a time, I worked as mostly a teacher. I was teaching in different capacities. I
Hmm.
didn't notice the way it was impacting my relationality, but it
Mm,
was, right?
yeah.
I ran a toy company. I didn't
Yeah.
notice, but it was. What are some of the ways that you find it really shows up at home?
Oh boy. I think managing my energy and my ability to show up for my partner and like be excited. I think I was reading certain dynamics between us as him like trying to take more energy from me and take time from me, when really what needed to happen was like, I need to give myself that energy first, right? And
Mm,
so that's partly why I've taken a little bit of a break from from like seeking non-monogamous partners,
mhm.
from my current primary partner. And that was because I was just like, oh, I'm not managing my energy well at all, just with myself, much less my, long-term romantic partner. Like I would be a mess with someone else, and I wasn't as aware of that previously, and wasn't as aware of like my weird attachment stuff I was doing with people, which like also a business will bring up so
Yeah.
quickly. I have staff, I have vendors, I have collaborators, and it's just like a hamster wheel of attachment issues coming at you. And if you don't deal with them, you're hurting both yourself and your business, which can be very painful. It's painful to deal with, but it's more painful to not deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. Super important to talk about capacity, right?
Yeah.
Like, it is completely reasonable to recognize that we don't have the capacity for like for taking on new partners, for
Yeah.
making small things happen in our lives. Like sometimes I really find myself shutting down and canceling all of the
Yeah.
all of the extraneous social stuff because my business is demanding it. And that comes at a cost. It
Hmm.
comes at a cost that I often don't see until afterwards. So while
Yeah.
I do notice it as like, oh, it is a capacity issue. And I give you a lot of credit for recognizing like, oh, this, I would not be good for other people right now. I would not be able to bring my best self. Sometimes we don't know until we're already in it.
Yep.
So hard
Yes.
to identify what our capacity is, what our bandwidth is before we get ourselves into a sticky situation.
Yeah.
How did you become aware that your capacity was not what you
Um,
would need?
well, I think I put myself into like the most extreme circumstances to figure that out, because for the first year or so I was doing my business. I also had a full-time job because that was just what I had to do financially. There was no real other way. Working in the, sex industry, I can't get small business loans from the government. So I had to do things a little bit differently. And I was just obviously exhausted all the time. And, when I get exhausted, my signs are that I lose my ability to speak well, my words get jumbled, and that was happening a lot. And I was like, oh, this is a very obvious physical sign. I'm really tired. And, invitations to be intimate with my partner were not met with like joy and excitement. It was like, oh, you want more energy from me, right? Which is
Mm.
not a great place to be, not a warm place to be, not where I wanted to be. And so it's been sort of like noticing what my physical signs are, noticing my reaction to my partner as well as other people around me, and sort of like trying to tune in, like, okay, where's that coming from? Why? Oh, because I don't feel like I have any time to myself. Okay, that's not his fault. That's that one's on me, and I got to negotiate that with him and the business both, right? Like I got to figure out how to have set days off, which I'm just getting to,
Yep.
a year and a half, 2 years in. Um, and I think I don't know if there was a different way to do that, honestly, because it just requires that amount of time and effort. But I think, again, as business owners and just people in general, like becoming aware of that and then making those small changes towards a better way of living and interacting with people really does add up over time.
Yeah.
And just, taking it seriously, making it matter, like not just bailing out from it and being like, well, we don't have romance anymore, like that's not really an option. So, um,
So I
having,
love that your business sort of demands, right? Like the business
yes,
itself would point a finger and say, hey, Beth,
right.
like you're a pleasure educator. You
Mhm.
are a sex educator. You espouse a certain set of values around pleasure and sex. I would assume that can be, I mean, that can be kind of a bitter pill to swallow though, when we realize that
Yeah,
we're the ones
yeah,
actually getting in our own way.
yeah. It's so human though. And I think,
Yeah.
at least for me, I sort of feel like I'm like, front lines. I am ready to help people because I am in the exact same spot everyone else is in. I didn't open my business because this was all easy and fun and just like, I didn't have to work on it. I opened it because it was a struggle and I felt like I didn't have the resources and I wanted other people to have the resources. Um, so I very much feel, folks' pain when they come in and they're like, oh, we're just not relating the same way. Folks are coming in, trying to purchase a toy for a variety, excitement, difference, or are, in a new stage of their relationship and trying to navigate that. Um, I at least feel like I can deeply appreciate what people are talking about, but
So,
also give them hope, right? Like, oh, I can do it. It's hard, but I can do it. So like, let me try and help you as well.
but there's the key, totally. Like what you just said, there is this presumption. And I've heard so many sex therapists say this too. Like
Mm,
there can be this presumption that we've got it all figured out,
yeah,
but there is no figured out. There
right.
is
Yeah.
only like if you're in a relationship, um, it is dynamic by its very nature. And then when it comes to your sexuality, I mean, we're all going through phases and state changes. And you named something pretty early in our conversation that I think deserves its own attention. Like being at different phases, whether that's because you're in different ages or because you're doing different things. I mean, I'm guessing your partner may be retired even if
Yes.
he's in his
Yeah.
70s, right? And here you are with a new and growing business.
Yeah.
Those are massively different stages. So what has that exposed to you about, because I'm thinking it would also
Mm,
expose some of your like relational values, like these
mm,
the
mm,
differences that get exposed, because not only are you different people, but you're just at different points in your journey.
right.
We all are. I mean, I'm only 10 years different from my anchor partner, and still like
Yeah.
very different spots, different
Yeah.
value sets.
Right. Yeah. I think I was lucky that I started the business after we'd been together at least 7 years. So we'd had some time, to sort of develop our patterns and appreciate each other for what we offered. And personally for me, I find it extremely relieving that I'm not competing with his own ambition. He's managing his life the way he needs to, and it's not like who's getting all the attention right now, who's getting the energy, who are we putting, the sort of familial effort and energy towards right now. It's not a competition, which is just like so important to me. And then he has time to sort of help me with random stuff that comes up, like what other partner was going to be helping make shelves, for a retail store, which is for a couple weeks at a time. So I benefit from it greatly. I do think, he would like to do some more like typical retirement things, like travel more and have extended time together, but also like I can manage my schedule now. So like we can be together on random weekdays and that's not a problem for anyone. So even though the amount of energy and time I've been putting out has been very high, I can still do things that are different than when I had a corporate job that I extremely appreciate and like really work for our lifestyle. So um, I think we're I think we're lucky in that way. And I think we meshed well enough at the start that there wasn't a huge amount of difficulty around this when I started doing the business.
Okay, but there is another kind of style that can
Mm,
definitely get illuminated when you're running a
yeah.
business. So I want to know what you learned about your attachment style, your
Yeah.
partners, like your tendencies in that realm, and maybe even
Oh yeah.
beyond just partnership. I'm guessing
Yes.
it probably exposed attachment wounds. Just opening a business
Yes.
can expose those.
Yeah, and sort of what you were talking about earlier with having to be very present in front of people. So all of my jobs before this had been very behind the scenes, and
Mhm.
I was praised for that. I was appreciated for it. I was the person who made things work for other people. That was my benefit. That was my self-worth. And I've had to completely rejigger how I access self-worth through this business. And a lot of that does come through attachment, right? Like yes, I'm making things work, but it's for me. And
Mm,
like, is that enough value? Like that's a weird new change. Not trying to like please this one or two other people who are in a hierarchy above me, which also is a repeat of attachment wounds, right? So that's been a big rejiggering and being like just being public with people. I'm not used to it. It took me a while to get comfortable with it. It took me a while to show up as me in front of people because I was used to also being like the nice person that I hoped people wouldn't like notice I'm a nice person and want to be friends with me, which didn't actually work in friendship and is like certainly not going to work in a business. So it sort of forced me very quickly to be like, no, I have to be myself. Like people will see through this immediately. And like this business is about people being themselves. I have to be myself. I can't like escape this in
mm,
this business, and then having boundaries with people incredibly crucial in a business. Something I was terrible at previously. I'm getting better about it. It takes time. With some people, it's easier than others. I was talking with my partner before this, and he's like, "Oh, what would you say is your attachment style?" And I was like, "It swings all over the place. Some people I'm anxious with, some people I'm avoidant with. It depends on the day, depends on what's going on. Some days I can really hold my boundaries, some days I can't." And so it's just a whirlwind lesson. I'd say my staff are probably some of my biggest teachers, because I have to be really aware of how I'm reacting to situations and my triggers around things. And then also learning theirs. And I think that's a nice thing to be able to do as a business owner who has hopefully a progressive business is like, let's be aware of our attachment styles, like let's not pretend that we're all just fine and like we're not going to be triggered by things. We are going to be. We aren't going to be triggered by each other on certain things, but we have to work through it, which has been nothing I ever experienced in the corporate world and got used to it in my romantic relationship. But boy, it's like really at its most intense expression, I would say, as a business
right.
owner.
Well, running a business with the intentionality of having it be a relationally healthy place. I mean,
Yeah.
that puts you in the outliers. It just does. I mean,
Yes. It's very
I
difficult to do.
it's not simple, and it can require a lot out of your team building as well. Like there are hard decisions to make. I mean, I have definitely been working with people where I'm like, oh, this person is not a good fit for the team. Just the way I've been in relationships where I'm like, oh, this person doesn't work in my
Mm,
life. Like it just doesn't work because it disrupts so much
yeah.
of my life pattern. Because I change myself in order to be there.
Right. Yes.
This
Yeah.
is where it is really helpful to be thinking about the fact that we're all in relationships all the time. But it's also it's a window into how to access more of ourselves in the
Yes.
working space, right? I'm
Yeah.
guessing because you're doing this, you're also able to facilitate a healthier work environment, facilitate a place where your people can show up with their full selves rather than putting up all persona all the time just
Right.
and hiding behind.
Yeah.
I mean, creating I mean, it is by definition different from what
Yes.
we were
Yeah.
all taught.
Yeah. It's very difficult to, I would say it's exactly what I wanted to do, but it requires a level of attention and thoughtfulness that I think most people are not necessarily used to in as far as like managing people and running a business. Like it's a lot of my time. And I very much hope my staff are having a good experience, but it really requires like being ready and willing to go through that rupture and repair cycle, which boy, I have been very shy of most of my life. And I'm really having to like show up for it, and be willing to hear hard things and work through difficult things. And I think it does, the same ways in relationships. That's sort of how you build and grow and gain intimacy with a person. But I think it also works as a business owner. That's how you develop a team that you have deep connections to and they have connections to each other. But boy, you have to be willing to go there, and it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. It's being willing to creatively meet the relational needs of the situation. It means that we have to look beyond what we see as like the imprint or like the archetype of the corporate capitalist business. This is what it is, and we have to show up that way. You're violating the rules, right, of that system, which means you are in a position to create an entirely new reality. But in my experience, it requires a lot of us as business owners. It just requires so much to show up as yourself and to keep your humanity, to not accidentally like shield yourself. It's not for the faint of heart. No. But it also reminds me of how important it is to open yourself up to all the tools. We learn these great tools, like what is a rupture and repair cycle? What is an attachment style? We learn these tools. So whoever's listening and like if you're listening to podcasts about relationships, like these things, they apply everywhere.
Yes.
My anchor partner's constantly taking his like what he learns in our relationship stuff, applying it to his corporate environment. He's like, oh, right. Because it's all relationship.
It is. And it's hilarious because everyone pretends it's not, right? Like you can just create a set of rules and a set of norms and everyone's fine. Nobody's fine.
Nobody's fine. It's the opposite. Fine. It's the other thing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I think that my big takeaway from this conversation is that if we really want to live in relational values, like if we really want to be living our lives with relationships as a central piece, then we need to allow it to permeate everything, including our businesses, and not pretend that there's something else, that there's something different, because that's what I have seen modeled my whole life. It's an act of resistance, an act of like real creative input to just do it differently, and to not be scared to be fully human.
Yeah. And I think there's a piece too about roles. I constantly run into my staff sort of saying like, oh, but you're the boss, and it's like, I don't feel like the boss, with like capital T and B, right? And so like having to both realize how I'm seen, but then try and transcend that is very difficult. And I think that makes complete and utter sense as well on like our relationships, right? Like you might be the mom, you might be the dad, you might be the parent, the partner, the, secondary person. And how are you both aware of that and then working with it in a way to turn it into your actual self instead of just like, oh, I am in that role, so I will just do X, Y, and Z thing, which I
Right.
saw a lot of in the corporate world. That's pretty much all I saw. But they were all odd expressions because it wasn't the true person, right? And it was how they were socialized. So,
Yeah, because you're
yeah,
creating the role.
right.
Just as much as you are taking it on, you are also creating it from the inside out. It's not, I don't think that that is our typical way. And same in my relationships. It's so easy to pick up a card and play the card. Like, this is what I've been dealt. This is who I am. And so much more taxing and rewarding
Yes.
to create it from the inside out,
Yes. Yeah.
which requires
yeah.
it requires showing up fully, but it also requires being able to make agreements and then being able to show up and actually hold to those agreements, hold ourselves to them. You said, when you mentioned, sometimes it's hard to hold boundaries. Yeah. Hard for me to hold my boundaries with myself, much harder than any place else.
Yes.
That's the tough one.
It is. It is. Yeah. But you feel it the second you don't.
For sure. For
Yes.
sure. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Okay. Beth, tell everybody where they can find you, because Earth and Salt is one of my favorites and I want everyone to know where you are.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Our website is earthandsaltshop.com. Same handle on Instagram, Earth and Salt Shop. Would love to see you on either one. Join our newsletter. And yeah, we'd love to see you either in Burlington or online.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today, Beth. It's a total pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliquiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com and find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.